Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be talking about a pretty fascinating project in Pakistan, the Reko Diq mine. And we're going to be looking at this question of, can it really be a model for responsible mining? We're in the 21st century now, and this is a massive project. I mean, we're talking about the world's fourth largest undeveloped copper and gold deposit. So the potential is absolutely enormous. But how do we make sure that actually getting those resources out of the ground doesn't completely undermine the goals we have for a sustainable future? So to help us unpack all of this, we have a recent blog post that we'll be taking a look at today. It's by Riaz Hack, and the title is Hack's Musings. Barrick Gold CEO super excited about Reko Diq copper gold mine development in Pakistan. It was published on November 19th, 2024.
Yeah, that's a really big question. And it's interesting that the CEO of Barrick Gold, Mark Bristow, is kind of framing this in a really, I think, compelling way. He's comparing Reko Diq to the Escondida mine in Chile, which is the world's biggest copper mine. And he's not just trying to hype things up. He's actually pointing to a model for how a mining project can totally transform a country's economy. Yeah, and that quote where Bristow says he's super excited about Reko Diq, I mean, that really jumped out at me when I was reading this blog post. It's like he sees this as, I don't know, like a turning point, not just for the company itself, but for Pakistan in a broader sense. Yeah, exactly. I mean, just to give you a sense of scale, Chile last year exported almost $20 billion worth of copper. Yep. Which makes them the world's leading copper producer and exporter. So I think when Bristow makes that comparison to Escondida, it's not just about the size of the deposit itself. It's about, this possibility that Reko Diq could position Pakistan as a major player in the global copper market, especially as demand for copper continues to rise, as we transition to cleaner energy sources.
Right. And speaking of that transition, Bristow actually says in this blog post that copper has no substitutes. So it really is this kind of strategic metal. So when we're thinking about this mine, it seems like we have to think about it in that context of the clean energy transition and the growing global demand for copper.
Totally. And that just makes Reko Diq even more important.
Yeah.
We've talked before on this show about the supply-demand gap for copper.
Yeah.
And how that's only going to get more intense.
Okay, so let's get into some of the specifics of Reko Diq. Bristow keeps using this term world-class to describe it. And you mentioned earlier it's the fourth largest undeveloped copper-gold porphyry deposit. What does that actually mean? Like, what is a porphyry deposit? And just how big is this thing?
So a porphyry deposit is basically a large, low-grade ore body. So think like massive volumes of rock that contain copper and gold kind of spread throughout. What makes Reko Diq so remarkable is that it holds something like over 14 million tons of copper and 21 million ounces of gold, just to put that in perspective. That's enough copper to build literally millions of electric vehicles and enough gold to, you can make a lot of jewelry with that.
Wow, so that's a lot of metal. But obviously with an operation this big, there are going to be environmental and social concerns. How can Barrick Gold kind of ensure that Reko Diq doesn't repeat some of the mistakes of the past? We know that mining projects can lead to environmental damage and social disruption. So how do they make sure this one is different?
Yeah, you're totally right to raise that point. The history of mining, especially in developing countries, there are a lot of examples of exploitation and environmental damage. So it's really important that Barrick Gold walks the walk here. Like, they can't just talk about responsible mining. They have to actually do it. And I think one key aspect of that is going to be the type of mining they do. It's likely going to be open pit mining at Reko Diq, which can have a big impact on the landscape. So they need to have really robust plans for things like minimizing dust, managing the waste rock, and then rehabilitating the site after mining is done.
And what about the impact on the local communities? Reko Diq is in Balochistan, which is a region that's experienced a lot of conflict and marginalization. So how do they make sure that this project benefits the local people and doesn't make those existing tensions worse?
Yeah, that's a really critical question. Bristow's talked about creating 10,000 jobs during the construction phase, and then something like 5,500 to 6,000 permanent jobs once the mine is operational, plus all the indirect jobs you get in the supply chain. But it's not just about how many jobs you create, it's about the quality of those jobs. Yeah. What are the wages like? What kind of training is provided? Are there opportunities for people to move up and have careers in the industry? And they need to make sure that the local people, the Balak people, that they're not just laborers. They need to be equipped to manage and operate this mine over the long term.
And it sounds like they're taking some steps in that direction with what they're calling their Human Capital Development Program. I was reading about this intensive 2-year training program they have at their mines in Argentina and Zambia. And they've already selected 9 Balak citizens to take part in that. So what do you make of this initiative? Is it a genuine commitment to the local people, or is it just a PR move?
It's definitely a positive step, I would say. Providing training and education opportunities to the local community is essential. And the fact that they're sending these Block trainees to other Barrick gold mines, that suggests they're actually investing in their future workforce. But the real test is going to be what's the long-term impact.
So it's not just about checking a box, it's about actually creating a pathway for the Balak people to benefit from this project for generations to come. Which, if we think back to Bristow's vision, that's kind of what he's aiming for, this idea of a multi-generational investment, something that could be transformative for Balochistan. It almost sounds too good to be true.
That does sound pretty ambitious.
Yeah.
And I think it's always healthy to be a little bit skeptical when big corporations make these big promises. But it is worth noting that this project has a complicated history.
Oh, right. I almost forgot about that whole legal dispute that led to the project being abandoned back in 2011. And then Pakistan ended up with a $6.5 billion award against it.
Yeah, that was a major setback. But this new agreement between Barrick Gold and Pakistan seems like it has addressed those grievances. Pakistan's ownership share in the project has been increased to 50%, and Barrick Gold has committed to a $10 billion investment. So it seems like everybody recognizes the potential here, and they're willing to work together to get this project back on track.
But even with the best intentions, can a project of this scale really avoid negative impacts on the environment and the communities? And how do we weigh those impacts against the potential economic benefits?
Yeah, that's exactly the kind of nuanced thinking we need to apply here. It's not about being for or against mining. It's about understanding the complexities and making sure the development is done in a responsible and sustainable way.
Which brings us back to your original question. Can Reko Diq become a model for responsible mining in the 21st century? It's a huge challenge, but the potential rewards are also massive. So as we dig deeper into this, we need to examine those potential risks and weigh them against the promised benefits. It's a delicate balance, and it's one that we'll be exploring in more detail. But before we get into those specifics, there's another aspect of this project that I find really interesting.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
Well, I was looking at a map, and I noticed that Reko Diq is located in this region called the Tethyan Metallogenic Belt, which is known for being super rich in copper and gold deposits. So what does that tell us about the geology of this project? And does it suggest there might be even more discoveries to be made in this region?
Oh, you're right to point that out.
Yeah.
The Tethyan Belt is like a geologist's dream.
Mm-hmm.
Stretches all the way from the Balkans in Europe to Pakistan. And it's been a hot spot for mineral exploration for centuries.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that Reko Diq is in this belt definitely suggests that there could be other undiscovered deposits in the region. It's like hitting a vein of gold. But on a geological scale.
So if we zoom out even further, what does the potential development of Reko Diq mean for the global copper market? We talked about the rising demand for copper, especially with this push for renewable energy technologies. Could this project actually help meet that growing need?
Absolutely. Remember that supply-demand gap we were talking about? Reko Diq could be a major part of filling that gap. With those massive reserves, it has the potential to become a significant source of copper for the entire world. And that's not just good news for Pakistan's economy. It's good news for the planet as we try to transition to a cleaner energy future.
But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We've been focusing on the potential benefits. But there are some serious risks and challenges associated with this project too, right? I mean, a mine this big, it's bound to have environmental impacts. So how can they make sure those impacts are minimized?
You're hitting on a crucial point. Any mining operation, especially one as large as Reko Diq, is going to have environmental effects. The key is to manage those impacts responsibly and minimize the long-term damage.
Okay, so what are some of the specific environmental risks that come to mind? I'm thinking things like water usage, waste disposal, and potential habitat disruption. How can Barrick Gold address those concerns?
Well, water management is a big issue in any mining operation, especially in a region like Balochistan, which already faces water scarcity.
Yeah.
So Barrick Gold needs to have a comprehensive plan for sourcing water responsibly, minimizing how much they use, and treating the wastewater effectively.
And what about the waste generated by the mining process? Where does all that rock and tailings go?
Yeah, waste management is another critical thing. The tailings, which is what's left over after they extract the valuable minerals that can contain hazardous substances. So they need to be stored and managed very carefully to prevent contamination of the soil and water. And the volume of waste rock they're going to produce is just enormous. So they need a good plan to minimize the footprint of waste disposal and ideally find ways to reuse or repurpose some of those materials.
So it sounds like there's a lot of potential for environmental damage if they're not careful. But what about the social and cultural impacts? We've talked about job creation and training programs, but are there concerns about disrupting local communities and their way of life?
Yeah, absolutely. Mining can be incredibly disruptive, especially in areas where people's livelihoods are tied to the land. Barrick Gold needs to engage with those communities in a meaningful way, not just telling them about their plans, but actually listening to their concerns and incorporating that feedback into how they design the project.
And it's not just about listening, it's about making sure the benefits of the project are shared equitably. We don't want to see a situation where the wealth generated by the mine just flows out of the region
Yeah,
and the local communities are left behind.
exactly. There needs to be a clear plan, and it needs to be transparent for how that revenue from Reko Diq is going to be invested back into the local communities. That could include things like infrastructure development, healthcare facilities,
Yeah.
education initiatives, and support for local businesses.
Okay, so we've talked about the potential environmental and social impacts. But there's another layer to this, right? The geopolitical context. We can't ignore the fact that Reko Diq is in a region that has seen a lot of conflict and instability. So how might those factors affect the development of the project and its ultimate success?
Yeah, that's a really important point. Geopolitics always plays a role in projects of this scale. Balochistan in particular is a complex region with a history of separatist movements and tensions between different ethnic groups. So Barrick Gold has to be very sensitive to those dynamics and engage with all of the stakeholders in a way that builds trust and fosters collaboration.
And let's not forget the role of the Pakistani government. They're a 50% partner in this project. So how stable is the political situation in Pakistan? Could we see changes in government or policy that might affect the future of this mine?
Well, the Pakistani government has been very supportive of Reko Diq so far. They see it as a huge opportunity to boost the country's economy. But like any country, there's always a degree of political risk, changes in government, shifts in policy priorities, even geopolitical events. All of those things could potentially impact the trajectory of the project.
So even though we have this new agreement in place and a lot of optimism surrounding this project, there's still this underlying sense of uncertainty. It's like everyone's holding their breath to see how it all plays out. It makes you wonder, is it even possible for a project this big with all of its complexities and potential risks? Can it really be a win-win for everyone involved?
That is the big question, isn't it? Is it possible to have large-scale resource extraction that benefits both the company and the country, while also minimizing the environmental damage and respecting the rights and interests of the local communities? It's a tall order. But I think Reko Diq has the potential to be a case study, a testing ground for whether responsible mining can truly become a reality.
Okay, so to bring this back to our listener, you, why should you care about this project? What are the key takeaways that you can apply to your understanding of the world and the challenges we face?
Well, I think Reko Diq is like a microcosm of a lot of the big issues we're dealing with in the 21st century. It's about the tension between economic development and environmental sustainability. It's about the need for corporations to act responsibly in a globalized world. And it's about finding ways to share the benefits of resource extraction more equitably.
And it's about the role of technology and innovation in meeting this growing demand for resources while also trying to minimize our impact on the planet.
Exactly. Think about the connection to the clean energy transition. We need copper to build solar panels, wind turbines, electric vehicles. But how do we get that copper without causing more environmental damage?
It's a tough question. But the choices we make today, they're going to have ripple effects for generations. So whether you're an investor, a policymaker, or just a concerned citizen, understanding projects like Reko Diq is crucial. It's about being informed, asking critical questions, and demanding accountability from those in power.
And it's about recognizing that we're all interconnected. The decisions made in a remote part of Pakistan can have impacts on the global economy, the environment, and ultimately the future we create for ourselves and future generations.
So as we move forward in our deep dive, we'll be exploring those connections in more detail. We'll be looking at the potential economic benefits of Reko Diq for Pakistan, the challenges of balancing development with environmental protection, and the role of all the different stakeholders in shaping the outcome of this project.
And we'll be thinking about the bigger picture. What does this project mean for the global copper market and the clean energy transition? It's a complex and fascinating story, and we're just getting started. Yeah, you're making me think about we talk about copper, and we're talking about, this whole Reko Diq mine in Balochistan, But we'll step back even further. What does this actually mean for the whole global copper market? We were talking about earlier how there's this rising demand for copper, right? Especially with this push for renewable energy technologies. So could this project actually help us meet that need?
That's a great question. We're talking about a huge deposit here. So, I mean, it seems like it could have a big impact. But I guess the question is, can they actually get all that copper out of the ground and into the market in a way that doesn't cause more problems than it solves?
Right, exactly. It's not just about the quantity of copper. It's also about how it's produced and what the social and environmental impacts are.
Okay, so let's talk about those impacts then. We've been focusing on the potential benefits of this project. But we have to acknowledge that there are some serious risks and challenges too, right? I mean, a mine of this scale, it's bound to have some environmental impacts. How can they make sure that those impacts are minimized?
Yeah, for sure. You're hitting on a really important point. Any mining operation, especially one as big as Reko Diq,
Yeah.
is going to have environmental effects.
Yeah.
There's just no way around that. So the key is to manage those impacts as responsibly as possible and try to minimize the long-term damage.
So what are some of the specific risks that you're thinking about? I mean, I'm thinking things like water usage and how they dispose of the waste and, the potential for disrupting habitats. How can Barrick Gold address those concerns?
So water is a big one. Water management is a major issue for any mining operation,
Mhm.
especially in a place like Balochistan, which is already facing water scarcity.
Mhm.
So Barrick Gold needs to have a very solid plan for how they're going to source water, how they're going to minimize their use, and how they're going to treat the wastewater.
And what about the waste from the mining process itself? Where does all that rock and tailings go?
Yeah, waste management is another critical piece of this, the tailings, which is basically the leftover material after they've extracted the copper and gold. That stuff can contain hazardous substances, so it has to be stored and managed extremely carefully to make sure it doesn't contaminate the soil and the water. And then there's just the sheer volume of waste rock. It's going to be enormous. They have to have a plan for minimizing the footprint of all that waste disposal and ideally find ways to reuse some of that material.
So it sounds like there's a lot that could go wrong if they're not really careful. But let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the social and cultural impacts. I know we've talked about job creation and these training programs, but are there also concerns about how this project might disrupt the local communities and their way of life?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Mining projects can be incredibly disruptive to local communities,
Yeah.
especially in areas where people's traditional livelihoods are tied to the land. So Barrick Gold has to do a really good job of engaging with those communities. And I mean really engaging, not just coming in and telling them what they're going to do. They have to actually listen to the concerns of the local people and incorporate that feedback into the project design.
And it's not just about listening, it's also about making sure that the benefits of this project are shared fairly. We don't want to see a situation where the wealth generated by this mine just flows out of the region, leaves the local communities behind.
Exactly. There has to be a clear plan, a transparent plan for how the revenue generated by Reko Diq is going to be invested back into those communities.
We're talking about things like infrastructure development, healthcare facilities, education initiatives, support for local businesses. Okay, so we've talked about the environmental impacts, we've talked about the social and cultural impacts, but there's another piece of this puzzle that we need to consider, and that's the geopolitical context. We can't ignore the fact that this project is located in a region that has a history of conflict and instability. So how might those geopolitical factors play into the development of the project and its ultimate success or failure?
That's a great point. Geopolitics always plays a role in projects of this scale. And Balochistan is a particularly complex region. There's a history of separatist movements and tensions between different ethnic groups. So Barrick Gold is going to have to navigate those dynamics very carefully. They have to engage with all of the different stakeholders in a way that builds trust and encourages collaboration.
And let's not forget about the Pakistani government. They're a 50% partner in this project. How much of a factor is the political situation in Pakistan? Could we see changes in government or policy that might affect the future of Reko Diq?
Well, so far, the Pakistani government has been a strong supporter of the project. They see it as a major opportunity to grow the country's economy. But as with any country, there's always some level of political risk. You never know what might happen. Changes in government, shifts in policy priorities, maybe some big geopolitical event. All of those things could potentially impact the project.
So it sounds like even though there's this new agreement and a lot of excitement about the potential of Reko Diq, there's also this underlying sense of uncertainty. Like everyone's kind of holding their breath to see how it all plays out.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment.
It makes you wonder, Is it even possible for a project this big, with all of these complexities and all of these potential risks,
Mhm.
to actually be a win-win for everyone involved?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Is it possible to have large-scale resource extraction? That benefits the company. That benefits the country. That minimizes environmental damage. And that respects the rights and interests of the local communities. I mean, it's a tall order. It's a lot to ask. But I do think that Reko Diq has the potential to be a test case for whether or not responsible mining can actually work in the real world.
So if I'm listening to this right now, why should I care about this project? What are the key takeaways here that I can use to better understand the world and the challenges we're all facing?
Well, I think Reko Diq is a great example of a lot of the big issues that we're grappling with in the 21st century. We have this tension between economic development and environmental sustainability. We have this need for corporations to act responsibly on a global scale. And we have this challenge of figuring out how to share the benefits of resource extraction in a way that's fair and equitable.
And we also have the role of technology and innovation. Can we find ways to meet our growing demand for resources while also minimizing our impact on the planet?
Exactly. It's all connected. Think about the clean energy transition. We need copper to build all of these new technologies, solar panels, wind turbines, electric vehicles. But how do we get that copper without causing even more environmental damage?
It's a tough question, and there's no easy answer. But one thing's for sure, the choices that we make today, they're going to have long-lasting consequences. So whether you're an investor or a policymaker or just someone who cares about the future of the planet, you need to understand these issues. You need to be informed. You need to ask critical questions. And you need to hold those in power accountable.
I completely agree. And it's important to remember that we're all connected in this. The decisions that are made in a place like Balochistan, they can have ripple effects
Yeah.
and impact the global economy, the environment, and ultimately the future that we're creating for ourselves and for generations to come.
So as we continue our deep dive into the Reko Diq project, we're going to be exploring those connections in more detail. We're going to be looking at the potential economic benefits for Pakistan, the challenges of balancing development with environmental protection, and the role that all of the different stakeholders have to play in shaping the outcome of this project.
And we're going to be thinking about the bigger picture too. What does this all mean for the global copper market and for our transition to a cleaner energy future? It's a complex story,
Ah.
and there's a lot to unpack.
It's amazing to think about how this one project in this one corner of the world could have such massive implications, not just for Pakistan, but for the global economy and the environment. It really shows you how interconnected everything is these days. But I'm curious, from your perspective as an expert, what do you think are the key things that will determine whether Reko Diq is ultimately a success?
That's a really good question. I think there are a few key areas we need to watch closely. First off, there's the whole environmental side of things. Can Barrick Gold actually minimize the impact of this mine? They talk a lot about responsible mining practices, but at the end of the day, actions speak louder than words, right? We need to see concrete evidence that they're actually walking the walk and that they're committed to monitoring and mitigating any damage.
And what about the impact on the Balad people themselves? We've discussed the potential benefits, but how can we be sure that those benefits are real and lasting? Not just short-term gains that disappear once the mine is tapped out.
Yeah, that's a crucial point. The long-term well-being of the Balak people has to be a top priority. It's not just about creating jobs while the mine is operational. It's about investing in things that will benefit them for generations. Education, healthcare, infrastructure. And it's about making sure they have a real voice in how this project is developed and that they share in the economic rewards.
So it's about more than just corporate social responsibility. It's about genuine partnership and empowerment.
Exactly. And that brings us to another really important factor: transparency and accountability. Barrick Gold needs to be open and honest about the challenges and the risks involved in this project, and they need to be held accountable for the promises they've made. That means regular reporting on their environmental and social performance, and engaging in meaningful dialogue with the local communities and other stakeholders.
It sounds like there's a lot of pressure on Barrick Gold to get this right, but what about the Pakistani government? They're a 50% partner in this project, so what's their role in making sure that Reko Diq benefits the entire country?
The Pakistani government plays a huge role here. They set the regulatory framework, they enforce environmental and labor standards, and they make sure that the revenue from the mine is invested wisely. They need to be strong partners in this, not just passive recipients of royalties.
So it sounds like a delicate balancing act, with both Barrick Gold and the Pakistani government sharing the responsibility. for making sure that Reko Diq lives up to its potential.
Absolutely. And let's not forget about the global community.
Hmm.
As we've said, Reko Diq could become a major source of copper for the world, and that's essential for the clean energy transition. But we all need to be paying attention. We need to demand transparency and hold both the company and the government accountable for their commitments.
Yeah, it's almost like the whole world is watching this project unfold. Like it's a test case for whether we can actually do large-scale development in a way that benefits everyone.
I think that's a good way to put it.
It's like Reko Diq is a microcosm of all the big challenges we're facing right now, trying to balance economic growth with protecting the environment and ensuring social justice.
It is a lot to ask of one project, but it also presents a real opportunity, a chance to show that responsible resource extraction is possible. If Reko Diq can achieve that, it could become a model for other mining projects all over the world.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of Reko Diq, I think we're left with a sense of both hope and caution. The potential benefits are huge, but so are the risks. It's a powerful reminder that the decisions we make today have a ripple effect far into the future.
That's for sure.
We want to thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the fascinating and complex story of the Reko Diq mine. We hope this conversation is giving you a better understanding of the challenges and the opportunities that this ambitious project presents, and that it's encouraged you to think critically about how we can extract the resources we need without compromising the health of our planet and the well-being of communities around the world